I never saw it coming. 23 years at Horizon Technologies. 23 years of early mornings and late nights. Of missed family dinners and working weekends. Of building something from nothing alongside people I thought were more than colleagues. I thought they were family. I was wrong. My name is Richard Keller, and this is the story of how I was betrayed by the company I helped build, and how that betrayal turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. It was a Tuesday morning in March when my world changed. Tuesdays were always board meeting days, and I'd spent the previous evening preparing the quarterly operations report like I had for the past 15 years as operations director. The numbers looked good. We were up 14% year over year, despite the economic headwinds everyone kept talking about on CNBC. I remember straightening my tie in the elevator's reflection. Navy blue with subtle diagonal stripes, a gift from my wife, Margaret, for our 30th anniversary the previous summer. "It brings out your eyes," she'd said. A small vanity for a man of 60, but it gave me confidence. I needed it that day. I just didn't know it yet. The executive floor was quieter than usual when I arrived. Jessica, our CEO's assistant, avoided eye contact when I passed her desk. Unusual for her. She was always ready with a smile and a quip about whatever sports game had played the night before. Not that morning. "Morning, Jessica," I said, pausing at her desk. "Board meeting still on for 10? She looked up, her expression tight. "Actually, Rich, Paul would like to see you in his office. Now, if you don't mind." Paul Westridge, CEO for the past 7 years, brought in from outside when our founder retired. Harvard MBA, 43 years old and obsessed with what he called disruption economics. We'd butted heads more than once over the years, but I respected him. He got results, even if his methods sometimes felt callous to those of us who remembered the old days. "Sure thing," I replied, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. "Everything okay?" Jessica just nodded, her eyes dropping back to her computer screen. Paul's office door was ajar. Through the gap, I could see Diane from HR sitting in one of the guest chairs. The knot in my stomach tightened. "Rich," Paul said as I entered, not standing to shake my hand as he usually would. "Have a seat." I sat, placing my leather portfolio, the one with the operations report I'd spent hours finalizing, on my lap. "What's going on?" Paul leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. He had that look, the one I'd seen him use when cutting an underperforming division or terminating a supplier contract. Detached, clinical. "Rich, we're making some organizational changes. As part of our strategic realignment, we're restructuring the operations department." Corporate speak. I'd been around long enough to know what was coming, but I still couldn't believe it would happen to me. Not after everything I'd given to this company. "We've decided to go in a different direction with the operations director role," he continued, his voice steady, rehearsed. "We're looking for someone with fresh perspectives, more aligned with our digital transformation initiatives." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "You're letting me go?" Diane spoke up then, her voice soft but practiced. "We're eliminating your current position, Richard. We've prepared a severance package." "Who's taking over operations?" I interrupted, already knowing the answer. Paul and Diane exchanged glances. "We're promoting Jason Mercer to lead a redesigned operations team," Paul said finally. "He'll be taking on most of your responsibilities, but with a focus on digital integration and automation." Jason, my mentee. The bright young man I'd personally hired 4 years ago, fresh out of his MBA program. I'd spent countless hours showing him the ropes, introducing him to clients, teaching him the intricacies of our business that you couldn't learn in any classroom. The same Jason who'd been increasingly absent from our weekly check-ins over the past few months, always with some excuse about special projects for Paul. "He's 34 years old," I said flatly. "He doesn't have the experience or the relationships with our key accounts." Paul sat back, his expression hardening slightly. He's got the technical skills we need for where the company is headed, Rich, and he'll grow into the rest. This is about my age, isn't it? The words escaped before I could stop them. And my salary. This is about the future of the company, Paul countered, though the slight flush of his neck told me I'd hit a nerve. Your compensation package is considerable. For what we're trying to achieve, we need to reallocate resources. There it was. After 23 years, I was too expensive. A line item that could be cut to improve the quarterly numbers. A grey-haired relic taking up space that could be filled by someone younger, cheaper, and, in their eyes, more relevant. Diane slid a folder across the desk. We're offering 12 months severance, continuation of health benefits during that period, and accelerated vesting of your remaining stock options. Given your years of service, it's one of our more generous packages. I didn't touch the folder. When? Today will be your last day, Paul said. For continuity, we'd appreciate if you could hand over any critical information to Jason this afternoon. Today. Just like that. 23 years reduced to a cardboard box and an awkward goodbye. We'd like to handle this as discreetly as possible, Diane added. We can communicate this as your decision to take early retirement, if you prefer. My decision, as if I had any say in the matter. I remember standing, my legs feeling oddly disconnected from my body. I'll clean out my office. Paul stood then, extending his hand across the desk. You've been a valuable part of this company for a long time, Rich. This isn't personal. I looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. It feels personal from where I'm standing, Paul. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I picked up my portfolio and walked out, leaving the severance folder on his desk. I'd have my lawyer review it later. The walk to my office felt like a funeral procession. Eyes following me, whispers starting the moment I passed. News traveled fast. By the time I reached my corner office, the one with the view of the river that I'd earned after my 10th year with the company, Jason was waiting outside my door. Rich, he started, his expression a mixture of guilt and poorly concealed excitement. I just heard. I wanted to... I held up my hand, cutting him off. Not now, Jason. But I said not now. My voice was calm but firm. I'll send you my transition notes by the end of the day. I closed my office door behind me, something I rarely did in the past. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at the space I'd occupied for over a decade. The photographs on the credenza, Margaret and me on our trip to Yellowstone last summer, our daughter Sarah's college graduation, our son Michael's wedding. The industry awards lined up neatly on the bookshelf, the worn leather chair where I'd solved countless crises and charted the company's operational future, all about to be boxed up and removed like I was never there. I sank into my chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting me with full force. At 60, I was unemployed for the first time since college. My carefully laid plans for retirement at 65, the 401k I'd been maxing out, the pension that would have vested fully in another 2 years, the comprehensive health coverage that Margaret and I relied on, all now thrown into uncertainty. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. How'd the board meeting go? Dinner at Antonio's tonight to celebrate the good numbers. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not yet. How do you tell your wife of 30 years that the career you'd built, the future you'd planned together, had just been pulled out from under you like a cheap tablecloth trick? Instead, I opened my computer and began drafting transition notes. Detailed, professional, thorough, just as I'd always been. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter, even now. By 4 o'clock, I had my personal belongings packed in a banker's box, borrowed from the supply room. Not much to show for 23 years. A few photographs, A coffee mug given to me by my team years ago, a worn copy of Peter Drucker's The Effective Executive that had guided my leadership philosophy. I'd sent Jason the transition documents, 47 pages of operational insights, client relationship notes, and process documentation. More than he deserved, but I couldn't bring myself to shortchange the company I'd helped build, even if they'd shortchanged me. As I waited for the elevator, alone by choice, I'd timed my departure for when most people would be in their late-day meetings. I noticed my reflection again. Same tie, same suit, same man, technically. But everything had changed. The drive home was a blur. I remember sitting in our driveway for a long time, the engine off, trying to find the words to tell Margaret. We'd built our life around my career at Horizon, the stability, the health insurance, the retirement plan that would have supported us comfortably through our golden years. Now what? When I finally walked through the door, Margaret took one look at me and knew. 30 years of marriage gives you that kind of insight. "Rich," she said, her voice already laced with concern. "What happened?" And so I told her about Paul and Diane and the severance package I hadn't even looked at, about Jason taking my position, about being too expensive and not aligned with their digital transformation, about having to leave the building with a box of memories and no goodbyes. Margaret listened, her face shifting from shock to anger to determination. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. That wasn't her style. "So what are we going to do?" she asked simply. Not, "What are you going to do?" or "What will happen to us?" What are we going to do? In that moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her all those years ago. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "The severance is 12 months. That gives us time to figure things out." She nodded, already thinking ahead. "Your pension?" "Partially vested. I'll get something, but not what we planned, and I'll need to look at options for health insurance." "And the Horizon stock?" I sighed. A significant portion of our retirement savings was tied up in company stock, a fact that now seemed like a terrible lack of diversification on my part. "They're accelerating the vesting of my remaining options. We'll need to decide whether to sell or hold." Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said something that changed everything. "What about all those clients who love working with you? The ones who call you directly whenever there's an issue, even when they're supposed to go through channels?" I looked at her, not following. "What about them?" "Rich, you've spent 23 years building relationships with the biggest players in the industry. You know their businesses inside and out. You know what they need better than they do sometimes." A small smile formed at the corner of her mouth. "Maybe you don't need Horizon anymore." That night, over a much more modest dinner than the celebration at Antonio's we'd planned, Margaret and I began to map out a new future. Not the one we'd envisioned for decades, but perhaps something better, something that was truly ours. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. out of habit, ready to start my day, only to remember I had nowhere to be. The silence of our house during what used to be working hours was deafening. The absence of emails pinging on my phone, the lack of calls from clients or team members needing decisions. It all left a void I wasn't prepared for. Depression crept in around the edges. I found myself watching too much daytime television, something I'd always looked down on. My exercise routine fell away. Why bother staying in shape if no one would see me in a suit anymore? The worst part was the sensation of weightlessness, as if I'd been cut loose from my moorings and was adrift in space with no way to control my direction. I'd stand in our kitchen at what would have been my lunch hour, staring into the refrigerator without seeing anything, feeling the minutes tick by with nothing to fill them. Margaret let me wallow for exactly 2 weeks. On the morning of the 15th day, She placed a legal pad and a pen next to my coffee cup at breakfast. "Time to get to work," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "Write down every client you've worked closely with over the past 5 years. Every single one." I stared at the yellow pad. "Why?" "Because you're going to call them." Anxiety flared in my chest. "And say what? Hey, remember me? The guy who got pushed out for being too old and expensive?" Margaret shook her head. "Number, you're going to say, I've started my own consulting practice, focusing on operational excellence and client relationship management. I'd value the opportunity to discuss how my expertise might benefit your organization." I almost laughed. "Just like that?" "Just like that." She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim. "Unless you'd prefer to continue your new career as a connoisseur of game show reruns." That afternoon, I made my first call, then another. The responses surprised me. "Rich, I've been wondering where you went. Horizon told us you'd retired, but that didn't sound like you. To be honest, we're having issues with the new guy. He doesn't understand our business the way you did." Not every call went well. Some were purely courtesy. Others never called back. But by week's end, I had 3 potential consulting opportunities and a slowly rekindling sense of purpose. I set up a home office in our spare bedroom. Nothing fancy, just a desk, my old leather chair that Margaret insisted I bring home from Horizon, and a new laptop. 3 weeks into my networking efforts, I received an unexpected call from David Chen, my former mentor from my early career days. He'd heard through industry channels about my departure from Horizon. "Rich, this might be the best thing that ever happened to you," he said after I'd explained the situation. "I was pushed out at 58, started consulting at 59, retired at 67 with more money and satisfaction than I ever had in corporate. You're twice the operator I was. You'll do even better." Coming from David, a man whose opinion I'd valued for decades, those words carried weight. That evening, I worked until midnight, refining my service offerings and pricing structure with a newfound confidence. Sometimes, validation from the right person at the right moment makes all the difference. My first client signed a 3-month contract in April, just 6 weeks after my termination. Stanley Broward, Vice President of Operations at Meridian Manufacturing, had been a Horizon client for nearly a decade. We'd worked together extensively on streamlining their supply chain. "When Horizon told us you'd retired," Stan said during our first official meeting as consultant and client, "I knew something was off. You'd always talked about working until at least 65. I maintained my professionalism, despite the temptation to badmouth my former employer. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes." Stan nodded, not pushing further. "Well, their loss is potentially our gain. We've got some efficiency issues in the new facility that your replacement at Horizon hasn't been able to solve. Think you can help us out?" That first contract was worth $27,000. Modest by corporate standards, but significant for my fledgling consultancy. More importantly, it gave me a chance to prove to myself that my skills had value outside the Horizon bubble. By June, 3 months after my termination, I had 4 active clients and was billing more hours than I could comfortably handle alone. I brought on a part-time assistant, Ellen, a semi-retired office manager who'd been downsized from her previous job at 57. She understood the need for reinvention better than most. "Never thought I'd be starting something new at this age," she said during her interview. "But here we are." "Here we are," I agreed. By October, 7 months into my new venture, I hit an unexpected wall. Westfield Group, a potential client I'd spent weeks courting, went with a larger consulting firm. The same week, 2 of my ongoing projects wrapped up without immediate renewals. For the first time since starting the business, I had gaps in my schedule. The old doubts rushed back. Had I been fooling myself? Was this success just a temporary reprieve before reality set in? At 60, did I have the energy to constantly chase new business? I found myself sitting in my home office one evening, staring at spreadsheets showing a projected income dip for the coming quarter. Margaret found me there, shoulders slumped. "Bad news?" she asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Just wondering if I can really sustain this," I admitted. Maybe Horizon was right about my shelf life. She studied me for a moment. Is that Richard Keller talking, or is that Paul Westridge? The question hit home. I was letting old wounds dictate my confidence. The next morning, I reached out to my network with renewed determination. By month's end, I'd secured 2 new major clients and expanded work with an existing one. The temporary setback had forced me to refine my approach and diversify my client base, making the business more resilient than before. Margaret noticed the change in me before I did. "You're humming again," she said one evening as we prepared dinner together. Another new habit we'd developed since my departure from Horizon. Before, I'd rarely been home in time to help with meal preparation. "Humming?" She smiled. "You used to hum when you were working on something you enjoyed. You stopped doing it about 5 years ago at Horizon. Now you're doing it again." I hadn't realized, but she was right. By July, 4 months after my termination, the calls from Horizon started coming. Initially about administrative matters, questions about files, clarification on client interactions. Jessica, Paul's assistant, was always calling, her voice carefully neutral. "Jason is looking for the proposal template you used for the Wilson account," she'd say. "He can't find it in the shared drive." I was polite but minimal. All my files were left on the server. IT should have backups. I knew what was happening. Things were starting to break down. The institutional knowledge I'd carried, the countless small but critical details about how our systems and client relationships functioned, wasn't something that could be easily transferred in transition documents or learned in a few months on the job. By August, the calls became more direct. Paul himself finally called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was between client meetings. "Rich," he said when I answered, his voice carrying that forced casualness of someone who knows they need something from you. "How's retirement treating you?" "I'm not retired, Paul," I replied evenly. "I'm running my own consulting practice, quite successfully as it happens." A brief pause. "Yes, I've heard." "Good for you. Listen, we're having some challenges with the Meridian account that Jason is struggling to get his arms around. I thought perhaps you might be willing to come in for a day or two, as a consultant of course, to help smooth things over." The request hung in the air between us. 5 months earlier, I'd been too old, too expensive, not aligned with their vision. Now they wanted my expertise back, but on their terms, for a limited engagement, probably at a fraction of what they'd been paying me. "I'm afraid my schedule is quite full these days, Paul," I said, allowing myself the small satisfaction of turning him down. "As it happens, Meridian is one of my clients now. I'm helping them optimize their new facility operations." Another pause, longer this time. "I see." His tone had cooled considerably. "Well, if your schedule opens up, the offer stands." It wasn't the last call. As summer turned to fall, Horizon's problems multiplied. 3 major clients, all relationships I'd personally cultivated over years, had either reduced their contracts or left entirely. Operational efficiency metrics were slipping, visible even to outside observers in the industry. Their stock price had dropped nearly 7% since the spring. In September, 6 months after my termination, I received a LinkedIn message from Jessica, Paul's assistant. "Rich, Paul would really like to meet with you privately. Things are not going well here. Please consider it. for old time's sake. I showed the message to Margaret that evening. "Are you going to meet with him?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. Part of me, the part still nursing the wound of betrayal, wanted to ignore the request entirely. Let them lie in the bed they'd made. But another part of me, the part that had truly cared about Horizon and the people who still worked there, felt a twinge of responsibility. "I think I will," I finally answered. "Not to bail them out, but to get closure, and to show Paul that I've landed on my feet, better than on my feet." We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Paul looked tired, the confident sheen I remembered now dulled by what I guessed were months of mounting problems. He'd lost weight, and not in a healthy way. "Thank you for meeting me," he said after we'd exchanged stilted greetings and ordered our coffees. "I'll get right to the point. We've made a mistake." I took a slow sip of my Americano, letting the admission hang in the air between us. "Jason is struggling," Paul continued, after it became clear I wasn't going to respond immediately. "He's smart. He's trying hard, but he lacks the depth of knowledge and the client relationships that you built over 2 decades. We're losing accounts. Meridian has cut their contract by 60%. Wilson Aerospace has put us on probation status, and Gartner Industries is threatening to walk entirely." I nodded. I knew all this already. The industry was smaller than Paul seemed to realize, and word traveled fast. "What exactly are you proposing, Paul?" He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We want you back, Rich. Operations director with promotion to the executive team. Full benefits restoration, pension continuation as if there had been no break in service, and a 15% salary increase." The offer hung between us. 6 months ago, it would have seemed like a dream. Now, it felt like too little, too late. "That's generous," I said carefully, "but my consulting practice is doing very well. I'm earning significantly more with greater flexibility." Paul leaned forward. "Name your price." I set my coffee cup down. "Paul, this isn't a negotiation tactic. I don't want anything from Horizon. I've built something better, something that recognizes my expertise as an asset, not a liability." "Then what do you want?" Frustration edged his voice. "Nothing," I said simply. "I don't want anything from Horizon. I've built something better for myself, something that values my experience and expertise instead of seeing it as a liability." "This is business, Rich." "Not personal," Paul insisted, echoing his words from that Tuesday in March. I smiled slightly. "You're right. It is business, and my business is thriving without Horizon." As I stood to leave, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. The need for validation from the company that had discarded me, the lingering questions about whether I could succeed on my own, the uncertainty about my value in the marketplace. "For what it's worth," I added, "I hope Horizon recovers. There are good people there who deserve better." I walked out of that coffee shop not as a spurned former employee, but as an equal, a business owner making decisions based on what was best for his future, not what might salve the wounds of the past. By the 1-year anniversary of my termination, Richard Keller Consulting had grown beyond anything I could have imagined during those first dark days after leaving Horizon. I had 8 regular clients, a small but efficient team of 3 other consultants, all experienced professionals in their 50s and 60s who'd faced their own versions of age discrimination, and a comfortable office suite downtown. Our revenue had surpassed $1.2 million, with projections for continued growth. My personal income was nearly double what I'd been earning at Horizon, and I was working fewer hours, with more control over which projects I took on. Margaret and I had adjusted our retirement plans, not scaling them back as we'd initially feared, but actually expanding them. At our financial advisor's recommendation, we diversified the investments that had been too heavily concentrated in Horizon stock, creating a more balanced portfolio that better protected our future. As for Horizon, they'd continued to struggle. Paul had been replaced as CEO just 10 months after our coffee shop meeting, the board citing operational challenges and client retention issues in their press release. Jason, my replacement, had left the company around the same time, his LinkedIn profile now listing him as a management consultant, corporate code for unemployed, and figuring things out. I took no joy in their difficulties. The rank-and-file employees at Horizon, many of whom I'd worked alongside for years, didn't deserve the uncertainty and stress that came with a company in decline. But I couldn't deny the vindication I felt, knowing that my value hadn't been as replaceable as Paul had assumed. Looking back now, the betrayal that once seemed so devastating had become the catalyst for the best professional chapter of my life. Had I remained at Horizon, I would have continued on the same path toward a traditional retirement at 65, my potential constrained by corporate structures and politics. The severance that had once seemed like cold comfort had provided the safety net I needed to take the leap into entrepreneurship. In the end, being too expensive had forced me to recognize my true worth, not as a line item on Horizon's budget, but as a professional with decades of valuable experience and knowledge that clients were willing to pay a premium for. And here's the financial takeaway I want to share with you. Tying your financial security to a single employer, no matter how stable they seem, no matter how many years you've given them, is a risk none of us can afford, especially as we approach retirement age. Diversify not just your investments, but your income streams and your skills. Build relationships outside your company. Maintain your professional network, and recognize that your experience has value, often more value than you or your employer realize. At 60, I wasn't obsolete. I wasn't too expensive. I wasn't past my prime. I was just getting started with the wisdom and insight that only decades of experience can provide. And the clients who now eagerly seek out my expertise understand something that Paul and Horizon failed to grasp. There is no algorithm, no app, no fresh-faced MBA graduate that can replace the depth of knowledge that comes from years of solving real problems in the real world. If you're watching this and facing your own version of that Tuesday in March, whether it's a termination, a forced retirement, or just the growing sense that your workplace no longer values what you bring to the table, know this: it's not the end. It might actually be the beginning of something far better than you've imagined. If this story resonated with you, whether you've been pushed out, overlooked, or forced to start over, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment and tell us. Have you ever faced something like this? What did you do next? Your story might be the one that inspires someone else to start over. And if you believe in the power of second acts, subscribe to Gold Print TV for more stories like this. Because life doesn't end at 60. Sometimes, that's when the real story finally begins.